So a very good evening to all of you. It's a pleasure for me to welcome Professor Anush Kapadia and all of you for this evening's second talk. Professor Anush Kapadia is a faculty member in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at IIT Bombay. His background is he did his BA in Political Science from Amherst College and then went on to do an MA, MPhil and PhD in Anthropology from Columbia University. And he has diverse research interests, and his one of his very well-known works is his recent book called A Political Theory of Money, which has been published by Cambridge University Press, which is a very recent publication, which has been very well received. And Anush has also been one of the prime movers behind setting up the Center for Liberal Education at IIT Bombay. It's probably the only IIT which has a Center for Liberal Education, if I'm correct, right, Anush? So thank you very much, and we really look forward to hearing from him on higher education and society. Thank you very much, Anush.
Thank you so much, Professor Saikia, for that kind introduction, and thanks everyone for joining this evening. So I thought I'd say a few words about the program as such, and use that as a way to introduce the kind of general topic in a concrete way. So a little bit of background about this new center. In fact, we're actually, after 2-3 tries, we're yet to actually get the program off the ground. So, and we can discuss the reasons for that. I think that itself reflects the role of liberal education in society. But let me just start off by motivating the idea with a couple of data points. So if you would go to the next slide, please. So this is data from the website is below. This data from the US Department of Education. Now, this is data that says, what is the percentage of, it's mapping the UG degrees of people and then looking at what jobs they get and how their jobs are related to their undergraduate degree. So it says the percentage of first-time bachelor's degrees recipients who reported that their jobs were not unrelated at all to their undergraduate major by major field of study between 1997 and 2012. They've gathered this. So in other words, for the total, about 25% got jobs totally unrelated to their, the dark line is 2012 and the light blue is 1997. So they say, so this means, of course, 75% of the undergraduates got jobs in a related field, right? It was related to their undergraduate major, which is their branch, their major field of study. In STEM, science and technology, engineering, mathematics degrees, the numbers are even tighter and getting tighter from 97 to, that means most people go into something related. In computer science, it's very focused. If you get a degree, you're very likely to get a job. In computer science, you're very likely to get a job in a related field. And in engineering and engineering technology, you're 85% likely to get a job in a related field, right? So these are the US numbers. How does your undergraduate major relate to the job that you get? And if you go to the next slide, you'll see this is an article put together by some colleagues who collated placement data from IIT Bombay. And I'm not exactly sure of the acronyms, but I'll make an attempt. So this shows you the first bar on the left-hand side is aerospace, 87%. And this divides the pack into core jobs and non-core jobs. Did you get as a BTech undergraduate in IIT Bombay, did you get a job that is your first job that is related to your undergraduate field of study? A full 87% of undergraduates in aerospace, as you can see, got jobs outside aero. The numbers for chemical engineering is almost 70%. No, sorry, that's for civil engineering. Chemical engineering, 65%. Computer science, similar to the numbers we see, most people got a related job. Electrical engineering, almost 50-50, and that's in electrical. Environmental, I think that's energy physics, perhaps. Mechanical engineering is 45-55 towards the non-core, and material science is non-core. So what is going on here? Why are the numbers in the US and India entirely almost a mirror image of each other? Why is it that US undergraduates who are in the engineering field get jobs that are very likely to get jobs in their area, whereas our undergraduates, especially, and this is IITs, we could do this numbers this is just IIT Bombay. We could do this numbers across the IITs. This was very hard data to get from our own placement cell, but we could do it for engineering colleges in general. So our thesis in the starting the Center for Liberal Education in IIT Bombay was that there is a problem of choice here. That how does an undergraduate know what they want to study? They have been faced perhaps a lot of parental pressure, a lot of societal pressure, a lot of financial pressure, maybe because they need to get a remunerative job. And there is of course, a practice in our job market that quote unquote engineering, and especially a degree, a BTech degree from a IIT, is of course a signaling mechanism to the market that you will get a secure job of some kind, right? But clearly they're not getting jobs in an area that is related to what they have studied for 4 years. So our thesis was that this is because students don't really get a chance to choose their major. They don't, or choose their branch, right? They are just whatever they get in the JE, whatever's left on the table once their number comes up, they have to take that if they want to, so people will even take a civil engineering seat just to get a seat at IIT Bombay rather than a higher branch in another IIT or something like that, right? So they're making these kinds of decisions. So why is this? What is and they're doing that because they purely have a kind of instrumental relationship to their field of knowledge. Now, it is a matter of sheer luck whether they are actually interested in chemical engineering or electrical engineering or civil engineering, even if they get the coveted position of a computer science seat because they've done well in the JE, they may in fact not be interested in computer science, and they may not in fact be any good at it, right? So our thesis was that this is some kind of a crisis. Why is this a crisis? It's a crisis on two fronts. One, we are IITs, we're meant to be producing engineers. And yet the vast bulk of our students are going outside their branch. So it seems like it's a kind of waste of a misallocation of resources as far as our teaching time is concerned. If you're taking 3 years of coursework in aero, but then 90% of you are going out of aero, then perhaps that 3 years of aero teaching time is not the best use of taxpayer money for all the salaries and for all the time that has gone into faculty time in the classroom. The other crisis is that one can imagine a particular kind of environment in this classroom, right? People are just there because students are just there because they wanted to seat at IIT Bombay. They have no particular love for aero or for chemical or whichever branch they find themselves in. So they are not there out of choice. They're just there because, I got some seat and I came into IIT Bombay. It's a prestigious IIT. The faculty also know that, they have a certain amount of seats in aero. And so whatever they end up teaching, they are going to get 60 students, 50 students, 40 students, whatever the number of seats is in that branch. So the environment in the classroom also becomes a little, shall we say, stilted, and people are there just kind of, not out of any intrinsic interest. They are just marking time. The third crisis is a crisis of mental health. So, there's a lot of stress and tension in IIT Bombay, of course, getting in, then immediately you get in, you're running this rat race to get a good GPA, so CGPA, so that you will get a good placements and so on and so forth, right? If you don't have any intrinsic attachment to your branch of knowledge and you are just kind of pursuing it as a means to an end, rather than, to some extent, of course, there's always a means to an end. One doesn't expect there to be purely a kind of interest-based pursuit. But the proportion of interest to kind of, a means to an end kind of instrumental relationship is really much more towards, what I can do with it rather than whether it interests me or whether I have an aptitude for it. That's not a very happy place for a student, right? That's a stressful place, and so much depends on something where one may or may not have any interest in. So that creates a crisis of pressure, that creates a crisis of mental health. So there is a misallocation happening here, and that is leading to some kind of poor outcomes, poor in terms of the public purpose of a place like IIT, poor in terms of the faculty time, and most of all, poor in terms of the students' mental health. So we thought, let us try to introduce, and we've had some difficulty introducing it for reasons I can go into. We tried to introduce a method where, in fact, we would introduce this concept of choice. Now, of course, the fear is that if you open up choice to the undergraduates, everyone will rush and take computer science and so on and so forth. But this is yet to be fully tested. And so anyway, that was the fear internally. And so we said, okay, give us 30 students and we'll go from there. But before I get into the details of how this program has gone on, let me talk about this model a little bit more. Can you move to the next slide, please? So this choice-based education, right? This idea that you should come into a university and rather than be, married to your particular course, and this is, of course, a technical university. We just have started an undergraduate course in economics. But if you think of any university, this is true in the US of technical universities or non-technical universities. In that sense, MIT also does liberal education. The idea of liberal is not meant to indicate the arts. It's not meant to indicate any political position. It's meant to indicate freedom of choice. That's why we want to emphasize this. You can choose a physics degree out of this if you like. If people are familiar, for instance, with the IISers, especially I think IISer Pune has this model. I'm not that familiar with the model in other IISers, but this is similarly there in IISers. They get an opportunity to kind of go across the board. The idea is that if the student gets broad exposure to a whole range of things that he and her may be interested in and tries different things out for size. After all, as an 18-year-old entering education, entering university, what is it that we actually know about our interest, right? We're still sort of being formed in so many ways as adults. And especially in India, especially those who are in the IIT, they have been extremely protected. They are a little bit in actual age, they're probably quite younger than 18. They're very sheltered and they're in a hostel environment for the first time and so on and so forth. So they don't have a really good sense of themselves. And asking them to commit to a kind of future course at such an early age seems destined for folly. And that is why we see, or that was our thesis. There was a committee of us who sort of did this. That was why you see the data that I presented earlier. So the idea is, and this is in a sense, very parochially American model. Europe doesn't have this, Britain doesn't have this, and therefore the kind of, those places colonized various parts of the world, and as we in India inherited and then adapted the British system. Of course, in the founding of the IITs, we claim to have emulated the MITs and the technical institutes in America. That's why we have a 4-year course, for instance, rather than the 3-year course, which was the British model. But in this aspect, we didn't actually replicate the American model. And I can go into the history. I've written a recent piece in the Indian Express in its lessons for IIT. It's an online column for the Indian Express that has some of the kind of history of the debates in the American system that went through this. Not that we should, of course, mimic the American system blindly. We should adapt it for our own conditions. But I think it shows a very interesting path that we have not considered. And indeed, a lot of us are not familiar with, because we come out of our own systems. If we go to, if we're familiar with the US system, it's mainly at a kind of PG level, not at the kind of undergraduate level. But this is a system that is there across the US, as I say, even in MIT, where you come in and you don't get admission to MIT computer science, or you don't get admission to MIT economics. You can choose that, but you have, and there again, it's a 4-year program, remember, the undergraduate program, like ours in IIT Bombay. So you have time. In fact, they give you time up to 2 years. You have 2 years to so-called declare your major, right? And so you get into, for instance, MIT, and You don't have to choose, you don't commit yourself to any particular branch in MIT. You can choose, the first year you can take a bit of physics, you can take a bit of bio, you can take a bit of music, you can take a bit of economics, you can expose yourself. And in fact, the choice is so bewildering in a broad university like MIT that they do two things. And we structured this as well in our kind of system, where you have to take courses in certain buckets, but so you have to take some social science, you have to take some sciences, you have to take some writing intensive courses, you have to take some reading intensive courses, and so on. But within those buckets, again, there's very kind of broad choice. So the choice is kind of constrained and structured. But the role of the undergraduate advisor is extremely important, therefore, of course, right? Because you're coming in, you have this entire set of choices you are developing as a young person, and so you have to be guided through this kind of choice. So they now in the way in this involved, no two students may have the same transcript. Each student's transcripts will be very, very different. It's a very bespoke, very customized way of kind of doing an undergraduate education. And I think part of it, and this links to the point about society, of course, this comes out of broader American preoccupations with the development of the individual, and of course, an innovative economy. And I will talk about those two things towards the end of my comments. And I'll just go through the structure to give you a sense of it. So when you enter, even though you have all of this choice, and even though this choice is kind of constrained in the way I've described, and different universities do the have the buckets bigger, smaller, narrower, deeper, etc., etc. Of course, there's variation at that level, but no American university. Indeed, this actually bleeds into the American school system as well. This concept of choice. So even though there is broad choice, often what faculty thought, and again, this went back and forth in the history of American education, is it too bewildering? Is it too diverse, and so on? So, and there were some people who were concerned that everyone is learning something different. No one is having a kind of a common baseline from which they can all kind of communicate, and there must be some skills that are kind of common to set you up for various kinds of things. There was also a preoccupation with classical Greek and Latin education coming out in the 19th century and so on. Anyway, out of all these debates, you got this compromise where they came up with something called the general education requirements, or sometimes it's called the core curriculum, where you have, say, 4, 5, 6 courses that, in fact, you have no choice over, that you have to take that. Either some students take it in the first year, you have to take it in the first year, and then you choose, or you have to take it over the course of your 4 years, and so on and so forth. But you get in, you take your core courses, and then you kind of build your own pathway, right? That is, and you build that pathway with a faculty guide. Each department sets its own quote unquote major requirements, right? So economics may say you need to do 10 courses plus a thesis. Environmental science will have another set of requirements. Maybe it's 12 courses. And physics, chemistry, etc., etc. Each department says, if you want to take a degree from us, these are the hurdles you have to do. And so the departmental level autonomy is maintained. Once you declare the major, then as it were, you enter that department. And then, even though you've entered the university, of course, everyone exits with a particular degree. And they have discovered that. And of course, this way, what happens is that you had a whole different flavor of the university, you get a whole different kind of educational experience, and the relation, therefore, that this system has to the rest of society will be quite different. Please, next slide, please. So what are the advantages of this? They should be quite obvious, but just to kind of lay it out explicitly. Now, of course, there's a better fit. That is the first data point that we showed at the start. The reason why students take jobs in related fields is because they really like their field, and they like their field because they have tried on very different things, and they've had the time to explore. And yes, maybe they took economics, and they took physics, and they took chemistry, Now you'll say, oh, but that was a wasted, they wasted their time doing so much, and they should have just specialized in one thing. But they didn't know, it's a search problem. They didn't know a priori which pathway was their optimum pathway, was the best fit for themselves. So you have to expend some resources to eliminate pathways, right? So even though the pathway wasn't followed, you now know something that you didn't know a priori, which is that I'm not really that good at chemistry. I don't really like math that much. I don't really like economics that much. But, I tried physics, but I'm really more interested in history. And so the out of and this, of course, as I say, comes out of a broader culture of experimentation and exploration that is there, and especially in American society, of course. Now, some will say they take that to a broader, sort of too far, and we can discuss that. But some safe sandbox within which, that's what they want to create, this safe space for students to kind of try different things, and that creates a better fit. So it's a better use of it. They also develop a certain kind of breadth. When it's like, if you like, just to use a contemporary metaphor, if you're training a large AI model on very same kind of data, then the model will be, of course, very narrow. But the more if you train that AI on diverse kind of data sets, then of course its intelligence will be kind of broader, right? So the having to forcibly expose, now again, this cuts against part of our own Indian common sense, right? Why are you taking any English classes if you are studying to be a civil engineer? Why are you taking any history classes if you're studying to be a chemical engineer? It's a simple, that's our common sense, right? It's a simple waste of your time. You must specialize, specialize, specialize. The thesis here is that there is an optimum amount of generality that will actually make you a better specialist. And that's actually bleeding into this other point about innovation, is that your brain is connected up. The world is also connected up, right? So it can stimulate you to think in very non-linear ways. It can push you to think out of the box, and you can also kind of push the envelope and in fact be a better specialist if you are kind of have a kind of broad foundation to build on rather than a kind of narrow build on. And again, you see the kind of innovation that comes out of the American system. There's no Silicon Valley in Europe, right? There's no Silicon Valley in England. Silicon Valley is only there in America, right? So there is this kind of push, and the Chinese, by the way, are trying to replicate these kinds of models of education precisely because they also recognize somewhere that to breed innovation and experiment as an ethic, you have to allow students a degree of freedom. Is a good generalist is better than a specialist, so to say? No, it's not. I would say there's an optimum amount of generalism, right? You can't be an innovative engineer unless you have good science foundations, right? If you just study engineering and a narrow engineering problem narrowly, you're very unlikely to come up with creative solutions. But if you have a broad scientific base and perhaps even a social scientific base, then you are more likely to kind of create a kind of, and of course the fit point is also there. You've experimented to find that branch, right? So which is your specialization even to begin with? You've experimented around. But it's not, this distinction between generalist and specialist is kind of is again a kind of dichotomy that we have. In this model of education, you have everyone is a generalist to some extent because you have a broad base, but then everyone also specializes, right? So this is not a degree, this is not a method of education that lacks specialization. On the contrary, you can super specialize if you want, right? Because you are taking the courses that you like. But because of this core curriculum that I was saying, this common base that everyone has, for instance, at MIT, 25% of all MIT graduates, one course they take only 4 courses a semester, first of all, in not 5, 6, 7 that we do here in IIT Bombay. If you have a certain GPA, you can take those courses. They limit it rigorously to 4 courses a semester. 1 out of 4 of those courses every semester has to be a social science course, right? That's hardwired in. Which social science course it is, you can choose from a kind of different menu and so on and so forth, right? So there is an optimum amount of breadth that allows you to get different perspectives. As I say, that trains your data set in a broad way. It allows you to think critically, rigorously. It allows you, of course, also to develop communication skills, because if you get stuck, every discipline, of course, has its own idioms, has its own practices of communication, and so on and so forth. So if you're in one disciplinary context, you start using the shorthands of that discipline, right? But if you have to move, you, as it were, become a little more quote unquote cosmopolitan, and you have to discuss with people outside your disciplinary four corners, and that gives you better communication skills, because you're crossing borders, as it were, within the university much more. You have committed students, right? In our context in IIT Bombay, students are committed merely because of the external pressure of marks, and everyone is fighting over half mark, this mark, that mark, because they want to move up the, right? It's a rat race kind of dynamic. And that is frankly very demotivating for faculty and very demotivating for the students. Here, students are not merely motivated by the kind of external carrot of the marks and the money that you will get upon graduation, but you're internally driven because you actually have found your calling, or you're much more likely to find your calling because you have gone through this process of kind of trial and error. And I've already mentioned the innovation part. You can go to the next slide. So this is the structure. I won't bore you too much with the internal details of it, but basically we had a core, which I'll show you about, and then after that core, so in the IIT Bombay context, we structured it as follows. Of course, this is not a branch available in JEE. This is only something internal to IIT Bombay. You can't choose the Liberal Education Center from your JEE branch. And we did that for a very specific reason, because we didn't want people to just take CLE because they wanted to, those same dynamics would apply. So everyone comes into IIT Bombay and takes common first-year courses. They take physics, chemistry, math. They don't enter their branch actually until the second year. And at the end of the first year, there is what's called a branch change process, which has actually now been suspended. But there is still the option to change into this Center for Liberal Education after your first year. So once you've done your first year, you've been rigorously trained in science in your first year. So we will give you another kind of training in the second year. That's the core course, which I'll come on to in a second. And then you choose your concentration, what we're calling a concentration, or what your. Now, rather than replicate the existing departmental structure in IIT Bombay, of course, we didn't also want to step on anyone's toes. We came up with 4 broad areas, and then in one area which you could really do your own kind of bhelpuri. But our 4 areas were natural science, engineering science, social science, and art and design. And I'll go into some detail about how that is. And you have to also do a seminar every semester, and I can talk about that more. And you must do a final year project, because we really want you to commit to a kind of long-term research project. So at the end of the first year, we actually put students through an exam and interview process. The exam's really not very hard. Again, we didn't want to create more kind of internal JEE dynamics. It's really more in the nature of a SOP. But then we really wanted to interview them, because again, we are looking for 30 outliers. The incoming batch is about 1,200, 1,400 students. And we didn't want people to try and come in just to kind of take a backdoor to CS, just to kind of get out of their branch that they didn't love. We really wanted to kind of see what if they had some spark to kind of push beyond the normal kind of, right? People are obviously very risk averse, given all the pressures we discussed earlier. But so we wanted a kind of in-house screening process to do this and take 30 students that way. Then, of course, they explore, and then after they explore, they can kind of they will whatever pathway they end up on, they will get it. So say they take 10 courses in any natural science, they will get a BS degree in natural science. Or if they take 10 courses or 10 plus courses in engineering science. Now, within natural science or within engineering science, for example, you can slice it as thin or as fine as you like. Within natural science, if you want to take all physics courses, you can take all physics courses. You still graduate with a BS degree in natural science, but anyone who reads your transcript will say, oh, this person is more or less a physics graduate. Similarly in engineering science. So you can take a cross section of engineering science courses, or you can go narrow. That's between you and your guide. We are merely there to kind of provide a passport. You see, think about it. You're coming into IIT Bombay, but as a regular BTech, you are absolutely siloed in one department. And departments give you 17 courses, 18 courses, 20 courses you have to, to sometimes between the department core and electives. You have very little space. Even now, there's been a recent curricular reform. The Kishore Chatterjee, a colleague who was on this committee, headed that curriculum reform and tried to bring a lot of this spirit of the liberal education to the mainstream BTech curricular reform. That the degree of freedom did increase for a regular IIT BTech, but it really just increased at the margin. The degree of freedom you get in this in our program is orders of magnitude more than that. So when you come into IIT as a BTech, and of course these are some of the brightest kids we have in the country, they are just streamlined into taking even design students can't take other courses in BTech, right? Because we have this very rigid, as I say, even though we've had this curriculum reform, still rigid program, overly rigid to my mind. And the numbers at the top again prove that in a sense, or establish that, or at least motivate that. What we want to do is say, look, you've come into IIT Bombay, here's IIT Bombay. Here's all these courses in all these departments. Go ahead and explore and figure out what it is that you like. The baseline we've given them is these courses. So we say these core courses they have to take. Now we chose these core courses with two things in mind. One, bearing in mind that they were already science heavy in the first year, we said let them be a little more social science, humanities heavy in the second year, so that year 1 plus 2 overall, that's more of a kind of balanced, if like, foundation. And the second one, we designed these courses, and they are outlined on the website. I'll give you the website in a second. They are designed to fill some gaps. So at the time, we didn't have a historian. We still don't have a historian of science. And inequality in society talks about sort of modern inequality, and digital lives, of course, all of the AI and big tech and how they kind of permeate the world, and how, the idea was, what should a student know about the world to kind of be a good citizen, to operate to give them some general tools, not any kind of specific tools for any of their things that they've also gotten in the sciences. So that was the motivation for this, but this is a kind of evolving list. Next slide, please. So this gives you a sense of the openness. You can take any of these courses. Your core courses are scattered across semesters, so you can see that the first year is not included, semesters 1 and 2, but this goes from semester 3 to 8, and all of these white cells you can take either natural science, engineering science, social science, art and design courses, and accumulate them, do your project in the end, and you graduate with a BS degree. Next slide, please. Just to shows you that this is the slide I was looking for. Of course, the departments still own the courses, so you have to get department approval. The thing that will structure your pathway, that will ensure, of course, that this is not a kind of random walk, an entirely random, undirected walk, is that, of course, each course has its own prerequisites. A higher level course will have a lower level course as a prerequisite, and that is true in all departments. So you cannot simply take a higher level course. You have to go through the sequence and take a series of perhaps even 2 or 3 lower level courses before you get into a higher level course. So that fidelity of the sequence of knowledge, which is a little different, of course, in the social sciences, although it's still there, but it's, of course, very sequenced in the natural sciences and the engineering sciences. That fidelity to those pathways is still there. You can't just choose irrespective of that. And that those courses are with the departments. And so basically at the end, if you've taken, say, 40% natural sciences, 30% of your courses are in engineering sciences, 20 in social sciences, and 10 in art and design, then you'll be awarded, but that we see at the end. Again, you don't have to declare a priori. So these are oh yes, and I should mention the custom concentration. If you want to do something very specific, you want to do biophysics, or you want to do a particular kind of engineering, you can even super specialize and have a custom concentration You say, look, I need these courses from physics, these chemistry, these courses from biology, these courses from, say, policy science, these courses from HSS, and I have an overall framework that I want to put these courses in. You can, as a student, again, you can sit with someone, you can put that package together, get it approved by our committee, and they will give you a BS in, say, biophysics or in particular kind of engineering and so on. This is our website. You can, as I say, so you're choosing your own pathway. Again, this is a pathway to science, to engineering, to design, even in particular, right? But if you're so inclined, and you may well be, even though you've come in as a BTech, and you can explore more about the course there. Let me end there and maybe say one or two things about how this relates to a kind of broader societal thing. And I've mentioned it already in terms of innovation. We think of higher education in the Indian context in a kind of vocational mode, right? That we need to equip students for the job market. And of course, we are a developing country. People are coming from all backgrounds in IIT, and those pressures are extremely well taken and well understood. What we perhaps don't understand is that in our anxiety to equip students for the job market, we have overly narrowed them, okay? And overly narrowing them actually does them a disservice. They overly narrowed both as citizens, but they are overly narrowed also as potential employees. Because in a world that's evolving so fast, in a world that has complex problems, where complex problems themselves are quite multifaceted. If you take climate change, you have science in there, you have politics in there, you have different kinds of institutional understandings in there, and so on and so forth. So you need to be a bit of a, not necessarily a jack of all trades, but you need to at least have some broad exposure to various things. And then your specialism will actually be brought to bear in a kind of potentially more interesting, complex, and innovative way. So you're more adaptable to a world of change. You're more able to kind of take on complex problems. And you are also able to, I mean, I was in a class of 200-300 students in one of my first years here in IIT Bombay. And these IIT BTechs did not know what the Cold War was. And I was a little stunned. I was like, what do you mean you don't know what the Cold War was? And they were like, no, but if we pick up a history book, they say, put it down and go and study for the JEE. Right? So we have overly kind of, in our quest for a kind of neutral, competitive way of entering IIT, which is all to the good, we have really overly narrowed these kids. And perhaps they are not becoming the innovators and leaders and indeed engineers that we had hoped for. Even though they get good salaries, they may exit, that's fine, but they really aren't really performing their kind of social mission. And potentially this can help that do better. So let me stop there. Thanks, Subodh.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anush. So invite any comments or questions from the participants.
Yeah, I have a comment actually.
Please go
So
ahead.
these days people are talking about liberal education, and rightly so. We have many university who are basically, they have one of their missions is to impart the liberal education. One of the universities in our neighborhood, Ahmedabad University, Ashoka University is also coming up. So what I see that it is easier to teach the engineering students the humanity courses, right? But what about other way around? Let's say if you want to teach some engineering courses or science courses to some arts or humanities student, they will really find it very difficult. The similar kind of, you say, mix and match is also required for those students so that
Absolutely.
they don't get narrowed down.
Yeah.
What are your views on that, please?
No, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, we have this, again, our specialization, of course, starts in the 10th standard. So by the time you may have not taken a math class beyond 10th standard math, you just have to start at their level. Whatever level, you have to offer a range of courses in science and engineering that will adhere to their level. I mean, give you an example of the, many people who come into IIT Bombay Many students, English is not their first language, right? They are very strong technically, but of course, English is the medium of instruction in IIT, right? You can even take the JEE in your own language. But when you come here, it's English. So, so we have to offer English courses for them, perhaps at a different level that is appropriate to them. It goes with this idea of a bespoke education that fits the student, right? It is not that this kind of industrial mass product kind of idea of, it's a much more customized product. So if you lack a science background, you haven't taken any science into this thing, we'll give you a math and science course at that level. Of course, in IIT Bombay, we don't have that problem for obvious reasons. But one of the things we face is, for instance, this program is only open to incoming BTechs. It's not open. We have a design school here, which is one of the best design schools, the IDC School of Design. A lot of those students, in fact, have sat for JEE, didn't perhaps get the result they want, and they have come to design school here, which is another entire entry process. It's called USEED. Those students cannot take courses in IIT Bombay, meaning in the BTech courses, right? They are actually banned from taking them, which is very strange to me. Because if the student, you allow them to take, if they fail the course, they fail the course. They will learn very quickly, or they will withdraw from the course before they get a bad grade, because of course students are, so those students will find their level. If you want to create a bridge from, say, design students to this thing, you provide some bridging courses, but it goes with the general idea of customization.
Yeah, I want to interrupt to give a very specific example.
Sure.
In my previous university, we had a visiting student from Spain. He came to do a project in biotech. His background was not basically in biology. He had not studied math since after school.
Sure.
He while discussing, he said that he wants to work on theory of evolution.
Okay.
Mathematical model. But then I said that you don't have background. He said that I will learn whatever it takes. I learn
Wonderful.
mathematics. I learn programming, computation, and everything.
Sure.
So it's mostly in the mindset of the students and the faculty also.
That's a wonderful example. Yeah.
Right. So I remember the name also. His name was Robert, so from Spain. So those mindset we also need to inculcate
Absolutely.
in our institutions.
Completely agree. But I think part of that is a kind of welcoming attitude to say, listen, we will also enable you to pivot, to learn new skills, and so on and so forth, and create an enabling environment for that. I should say that we are getting students are a bit wary about leaving their BTech degree and coming to a BS degree in something. I think parents want to know, what are my students? What is the course that you're getting into? I think students also are comfortable with a kind of familiar brand, as it were, in the BTech. So and they are so focused on the rat race that it's proving hard to kind of recruit students for this.
Yeah, there is a personal story also. My cousin got selected in this BRC training school. So he was willing to join Indore, but his parents told that no, you join BRC, because people know that Baba Atomic Research Center. Nobody knows the RK. So
yeah,
those kind of inputs
so
also came from the family.
our wager was that in the end you're getting a degree from IIT Bombay, so that should mitigate the risk.
Okay, thank you very much, Anush, for a wonderful talk.